in the rolling hills of Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, the year 1845 arrived cloaked in mist and quiet desperation. The hamlet of Sacred Heart, no more than a scattered cluster of wooden homes and muddy trails, clung to its faith like a lantern. In a storm, built by Irish immigrants fleeing famine, this tiny Catholic community had forged its identity from stone, sweat, and scripture. At its center stood St. Joseph's Church, its gray stone walls rising modestly above the banks of Mill Creek, its bell tower a solemn sentinel against the uncertain world. For the 312 souls who called Sacred Heart home, St. Joseph's was more than a place of worship. It was the heart of the village, a sanctuary where the faithful sought not just absolution but hope. They had labored for years to construct it, hauling rock from nearby quarries, sawing timber by hand, giving their pennies and their prayers to raise a church in which their children could kneel. Then, in the autumn of that year, he came. Man who stepped down from his rain-spattered carriage on that October Tuesday might as well have descended from the clouds. Father Cornelius O'Malley was tall 6 feet or more, with striking silver hair and eyes like winter sky. He bore the confidence of someone born to command, but tempered it with the soft lilt of a Dublin education. He spoke like a scholar, moved like a soldier, and preached like a prophet, and the people adored him. He introduced himself with grace and humility, bearing letters of appointment from none other than Bishop Francis Kenrick of Philadelphia. The villagers, weary from weeks without a priest since old Father McConaughey's sudden death, welcomed Ali with open arms and tearful gratitude. No one questioned the timing. No one doubted the authenticity of the documents he carried. His arrival felt like divine intervention, precisely the balm they had prayed for. Within weeks, Ali transformed Sacred Heart. His sermons were magnetic. Parishioners traveled from miles around to hear him speak of sacrifice, salvation, and divine mystery. His Latin was flawless, his knowledge of doctrine exhaustive. More importantly, he connected with the people. He understood their struggle. Many of the men working in coal mines or toiling in Pittsburgh steel mills, often gone for days. To the mothers left behind, Ali became a spiritual compass. To their children, especially their sons, he became something more. He established a formal altar boy program, the first in the parish's history. Young boys, previously unruly and directionless, now knelt at Ali's feet, reciting prayers in Latin and learning the sacred rituals of Mass. The parents saw this as an opportunity, perhaps even a divine calling. The church, after all, was one of the few doors to education and social mobility open to them in Protestant America. Among those selected was Michael Flanagan, a baker's son known for his mischievous grin and stuttering prayers. Under Ali's guidance, he bloomed. Soon he was delivering Latin responses with crisp clarity and preparing communion wine like a practiced seminarian. Another was Tommy Sullivan, just 10 years old, who began speaking of the Holy Trinity with such depth that even visiting priests were taken aback. Ali's charm was undeniable. He commissioned stained glass windows of Irish Saints Bridget, Columba, and Patrick, whose lives paralleled the immigrant experience. He ordered a bronze bell for the tower, its deep chime calling the faithful from as far as the hills beyond. The creek. The church became not just a building, but a beacon. But what no one questioned, what no one wanted to question, was Ali's growing intimacy with the boys. He would keep them after Mass for special instruction, explaining that certain rituals were too sacred for the wider congregation. These lessons, he said, were best held in the church basement, a storage area beneath the altar. There, the boys learned how to light candles properly, how to polish the brass, and how to chant prayers only the initiated would understand. There, parents noticed changes. But they weren't concerned, not at first. The boys became more serious, more devout. They spent less time playing and more time fasting, reflecting, praying. They stopped speaking of childish things and began quoting Scripture. They called themselves the Brotherhood, a term Ali had whispered to them in candlelit sessions. Mary Sullivan beamed with pride as her son, Tommy, explained the mysteries of the Eucharist. She never questioned why he now avoided eye contact, or why he slept fitfully, muttering prayers in his dreams, or why he once told her, absently, that some prayers hurt to say. Still, to the village, Ali was the model priest, devout, learned, vigilant. When he mentioned that the boys needed discipline, parents nodded. When he said that their souls needed preparation, they wept with gratitude. And when he reminded them of the dangers of temptation, that the devil walked among them in Protestant clothing, they believed him. No one connected the dots. Not then. No one noticed how every boy selected by Father Ali seemed increasingly isolated, or how he warned them never to speak of what they learned during their advanced training. It was all couched in holy terms: obedience, sacrifice, secrecy. And what parent would question a man of God? Then, on March 19, 1847, the illusion shattered. It was the feast of Saint Joseph, one of the holiest days in the Catholic calendar. A special dawn mass was scheduled, and Michael Flanagan, now 12, was selected to assist. His mother, Bridge, ironed his surplice to perfection and watched proudly as he disappeared into the misty morning with his prayer book under one arm. She would never see him again. Hours passed, then half a day. By evening, when the church remained locked and silent, panic swept through Sacred Heart. The community that once sang in joy now cried out in anguish, combing the forests and dragging the creeks. No one could find a trace of the boy, not even his footprints in the spring-frosted grass. Father Ali returned that evening, his cloak muddy and his horse foaming at the mouth. He claimed he had ridden to Pittsburgh to consult the bishop about expanding the altar boy program. A program, he said, the diocese wished to replicate elsewhere. When told about Michael's disappearance, he bowed his head and wept. And the villagers wept with him. No one saw it then, the crack in the mask, the falter in his voice. He led prayers. He organized search parties. He consoled the family. But when the crowd gathered for a special address days later, he changed the story. He told them Michael had sinned, that the boy had confessed to stealing communion wine, too, performing mock rituals with Protestant boys, that he had run away ashamed, broken, perhaps damned. The congregation gasped. The Flanagans sobbed. And just like that, the mystery was replaced with a scandal. And with scandal came silence. No one dared question a priest. No one wanted to dig deeper into a truth that might shatter their faith. No one except a cleaning woman named Margaret O'Brien, who had seen Michael's prayer, book bloodied and left behind in the sacristy, and smelled something vile drifting from the church basement. But when she spoke up, Ali's voice turned. Cold gossip, he said, is the devil's tool. And thus, the first of 14 altar boys vanished beneath the shadow of St. Joseph's Catholic Church, in a town too faithful to ask the questions that might have saved their sons. Weeks passed, but the grief in Sacred Heart never softened. Michael Flanagan's disappearance had been absorbed into the rhythms of daily life, not forgotten, but buried beneath layers of prayer, silence, and weary acceptance. The search parties disbanded. The forest returned to its hush. And the boy's name, once spoken with pride, now hung in the air like an unspoken sin. Father Ali, meanwhile, became something of a martyr in the eyes of his congregation. He had, after all, lost one of his most devoted altar boys. His sermons turned somber, his homilies laced with warnings of hidden darkness and the consequences of spiritual disobedience. He called Michael's vanishing a test of faith for himself, for the parents, and for the parish. The faithful nodded, believing more fiercely than ever that their suffering was part of some divine mystery. But beneath the facade, something was changing. Ali's sermons began to focus on obedience, not as a virtue, but as a mandate. He spoke of those who were called to serve, whose loyalty must be absolute. He warned of demonic forces that whispered to the innocent, seeking to corrupt their purity. "The altar is a battlefield," he proclaimed one Sunday, his voice rising like a hammer, "and our boys are soldiers. But soldiers must be trained, tested." That word tested became a cornerstone of his new program. In the months that followed, he altered the altar boy system completely. Group lessons were replaced with private sessions, held exclusively in the church basement, a space now referred to as the sanctified chamber. He claimed it was necessary for spiritual refinement, an echo chamber where worldly distractions couldn't interfere with the holy. Parents were told that the basement had been blessed, cleansed with sacred incense, and fortified with relics older than the church itself. Few questioned him. Tommy Sullivan, now 11 and the eldest remaining altar boy, was the first to begin this new form of instruction. His transformation was immediate and unsettling. He stopped speaking like a child. His vocabulary became ornate. Archaic words like penitence and sacramentum rolled from his tongue like a theologian. He no longer played in the stream near Mill Creek or traded apple cores with the younger boys. Instead, he spent long hours in solitude, eyes closed, whispering prayers that no one recognized. Mary Sullivan, proud and pious, at first considered this a blessing. "He's growing into something holy," she told the other mothers. "Ali says the Lord has plans for him." But at night, Tommy began screaming in his sleep. He'd cry out for light, for help, for someone to shut the door. And when Mary rushed in, he'd be drenched in sweat, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. "The man in the shadows," he whispered once. "He wears Father's voice, but he isn't Father." Mary dismissed it as bad dreams, growing pains. 2. Much incense and fasting. But deep down, a flicker of fear had taken root. She wasn't alone. Kathleen Murphy, whose son Danny had just begun altar boy training, noticed a similar shift. Her cheerful, talkative child turned quiet. When asked about his sessions, he would only nod and say, "We're learning the old ways. Father says I can't share them yet." Old ways? Kathleen hadn't heard that phrase before. She asked the priest after Mass, and he smiled warm, reassuring. "The old ways," he explained, "are the earliest forms of Catholic discipline. Purified prayers, deeper rituals, forgotten by modern seminaries, but preserved through God's grace in places like Sacred Heart." It sounded plausible. It even sounded wise. But then the physical changes began. Danny started losing weight. Not dramatically, but noticeably. His skin looked pale, his lips dry. He began developing a tremor in his hands, especially when he returned from his private lessons. He'd sit in a daze at the dinner table, murmuring phrases in Latin no one had taught him. Once, Kathleen caught him drawing something in the condensation on his bedroom window. When she looked closer, it wasn't a cross. It was a sigil, looping and sharp, like a spiderweb drawn in haste. When she asked him what it was, he simply said, "Father calls it the mark of protection." She wiped it away. The more Kathleen voiced her concern to other mothers, the more she was met with resistance. Some offered polite smiles. Others warned her not to interfere. "Our sons are growing into saints," said Eileen Walsh, whose boy Timothy had also joined the program. "Father Ali says they've been chosen. You should be proud, not worried." Chosen. That word began to echo through Sacred Heart like a chime struck too often. Chosen for what? And why did they look so tired? Behind closed doors, Kathleen kept track. She noticed the patterns, how each boy began as a volunteer, how they were praised, then separated, then silenced, And then, hollowed-out Timothy developed a stutter he'd never had before. Brian O'Connor, once full of energy, now sat for hours staring blankly into the trees. Patrick Donnelly, who once told anyone who'd listen that he wanted to be a priest like Father Ali, now flinched whenever the priest entered the room. The boys weren't becoming holier. They were becoming haunted. Margaret O'Brien, the cleaning woman, remained the only adult in Sacred Heart, unafraid to speak in whispers. She had long since grown cautious of Father Ali's charm. She'd seen too many candle stubs melted into odd shapes, too many footprints leading to the locked basement. She'd noticed that the incense smell had changed. It now mingled with something sour, something like meat left out too long. When she found Tommy Sullivan's small wooden cross tucked beneath the altar, cross he'd worn every day since his grandfather's death, her heart turned to ice. She showed it to Ali the next morning. He stared at the artifact with eerie calm. "Some things must be left behind," he said, "when you walk deeper into faith." Margaret said nothing. But that evening, she began keeping a journal. Day by day, she logged everything. The locked doors, the flickering candles, the patterns of who stayed after Mass. She noted how Father Ali began referencing unfamiliar saints. Saints whose names didn't appear in any Catholic record. And on March 19, 1848, exactly 1 year after Michael Flanagan disappeared, Tommy Sullivan was gone. His parents were told the next morning during a special announcement at Mass. With measured reverence, Ellie told them that Tommy had been called on a divine mission personally selected by Bishop Kenrick to travel west and help establish parishes among the growing Irish settlements in Ohio and Indiana. He read a letter, stamped with wax and a bishop's seal, praising Tommy's spiritual depth. The congregation applauded. His parents wept with pride. Not only Margaret noticed the open basement door that morning. Only she smelled the thick swirl of incense and rot drifting up from beneath the floorboards. Only she saw the shadow flicker where no sunlight touched. She returned to her room that night and wrote just one sentence in her journal: "The altar devours what the pews deliver." By the spring of 1849, Sacred Heart had changed. Outwardly, the village looked the same, smoke curling from chimneys, boys running beside wagons, women pinning laundry to sagging lines, but something had shifted beneath the surface. The laughter was thinner, the prayers more desperate, and at the heart of this change stood the altar of St. Joseph's Church, a place once built with devotion, but now weighed down by secrecy. 5 altar boys had now vanished in 2 years. Each disappearance followed the same rhythm: whispered spiritual instruction, a deepening bond with Father Ali, late-night vigils, then silence. Always around March, always near the feast of St. Joseph. Each time, the explanation shifted: a special mission, a holy retreat, an invitation to distant seminaries. Parents were offered documents, stamped with wax and sealed with ecclesiastical grandeur, as if paperwork could eclipse a mother's grief. Still, no one openly questioned the pattern. No one dared. Father Ali's influence had grown absolute. He was no longer just a priest. He was the voice of God in Sacred Heart. To challenge him felt like blasphemy. To doubt him was to betray the Church. Even the most skeptical parishioners, the old coal miners and stone-faced mothers, fell into line. Until Patrick Donnelly began to see the truth. Patrick was 16 now, the oldest of the altar boys and the last of the original group. He was bright, perceptive, and once had dreams of wearing the cassock himself. For years, he had idolized Father Ali. The priest's intellect, his composure, his unwavering sense of purpose. Patrick saw it all as something to aspire to. He had clung to Ali like a spiritual compass, but over time, admiration curdled into suspicion. The lessons had changed. What once felt like mentorship had become something else, something colder, deeper, wrong. Ali had begun introducing ancient rites, prayers in languages Patrick didn't recognize. The priest claimed they predated Latin, that they were remnants of early Christian mystics, long forgotten by the modern church. But when Patrick chanted them, he felt less connected to God and more like he was being hollowed out from the inside. One night, deep in the basement beneath the church, Father Ali revealed a chamber Patrick had never seen before. It was carved from rock, lit by candles that flickered in unnatural colors, violet, green, even blue. Symbols covered the walls, twisting and interwoven, seeming to shimmer if you stared too long. "This," Ali whispered, "is where true communion begins." And that was when Patrick saw them, the missing altar boys. They were standing along the far wall, motionless in white robes embroidered with strange sigils. Their faces were pale and glassy, their eyes reflecting the candlelight like mirrors. They didn't blink. They didn't move. "Michael?" Patrick whispered. "Tommy?" They said nothing. But when their mouths opened, a single voice spoke from them all low, cold and layered, as though multiple voices were tangled into one. "Join us." Patrick bolted from the chamber, gasping for air. Ali caught up with him in the hallway and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You've seen the sacred," he said calmly. "You should feel honored." But Patrick didn't feel honored. He felt like prey. That night, he went home to his father and told him everything. James Donnelly, a man of steel and ash, had once trusted Father Ali with his life. Now he sat silent. As Patrick spoke about the basement chambers, the chanting, the voices, the symbols, the boys with empty eyes. When his son finished, James didn't speak for a long time. Then he whispered, "We need to tell someone." But who? They couldn't. Go to the sheriff of Protestant, unlikely to care about a handful of missing Irish Catholic boys. And the bishop's office? Father Ali carried sealed documents bearing Bishop Kenrick's own name. What if the bishop had sent him here? What if this was sanctioned? Still, James couldn't sit idle. He reached out to two other fathers, Sean O'Connor, whose son Liam had vanished the previous year, and Michael Walsh, whose boy Timothy had begun to stutter and avoid sunlight. They met in James's kitchen under cover of night, sipping cheap whiskey and staring at the fire. "We all feel it," James said, "but we've been too afraid to admit it." "I've heard sounds at night," Sean muttered. "Not prayers. Something else. Something wrong. My boy. He talks to himself now," Michael added. "And the things he says, they don't sound like him. They sound borrowed." They decided to act. They would observe the church at night, especially during the week of St. Joseph's feast day, when the disappearances always occurred. Patrick drew them a crude map of the basement layout, detailing the hidden staircase and the strange chamber beneath the sacristy. They agreed on one rule. They would not confront Ali directly. Not yet. First, they needed proof. In the days that followed, Father Ali sensed a change. He began watching the Donnellys more closely. He asked Patrick to stay longer after Mass. He told James that his son was approaching a moment of spiritual evolution and needed privacy. But James refused to send him anymore. Then came March 19th, 83 years to the day since Michael Flanagan had disappeared. The men took their positions. Sean hid behind the stone mausoleum in the graveyard. Michael concealed himself near the bell tower with a view of the basement windows. James, armed with a lantern and his grandfather's rifle, crouched beneath the back staircase that led into the lower level. For 3 hours, nothing. Then, just after 2 a.m., the lights appeared, not the warm glow of candles or oil lamps, but an otherworldly flicker blue, red, violet, as if fire had been turned inside out. A rhythmic sound began to echo, soft at first, then pulsing like a heartbeat. Voices rose in chant, not in Latin, not in English, but in something that made their teeth ache just to hear. James crept toward the open basement door. The warmth from inside was sickly, like meat left too long in the sun. The scent of incense was thick floral, yes, but also coppery and wet. He took one step, then another, down the stone stairs, into the dark, and then he saw them. 7 altar boys stood in a perfect circle, their robes gleaming with embroidered symbols. They moved in unison, their bodies swaying to a rhythm no one else could hear. In the center stood Father Ali, arms outstretched, eyes closed, mouth moving in words that cracked the air like breaking bones. Patrick was among them. Still, human barely, James's heart nearly burst from his chest. His hands shook. His son turned toward him, lips parting. Their eyes met, and then, in unison, all 7 boys turned too. Ali's voice dropped into something inhuman. Who watches where no eyes should see? James stumbled backward, knocking over a candle. The flame flared, then died, and the boys moved. Knock-Ran moved, as if gliding, synchronized, eyes glowing with a hunger no child should know. James turned and fled. Above ground, Sean and Michael were already running. Something had emerged from the churchyard white shapes, moving with jerking speed. Whispers followed them, words that coiled in their ears like smoke. They ran until the forest swallowed them, until the sun rose. And still, the whispers chased them in their dreams. The sun rose slowly over Sacred Heart, the morning after the fathers fled the church, casting long shadows that crawled like fingers across the village. To anyone waking in their modest wooden homes, it looked like any other spring morning. But for James Donnelly, Sean O'Connor, and Michael Walsh, nothing would ever be the same again. They had seen it, not just the basement, not just the boys, but the truth that the man who wore the cassock, the man who baptized their children, who held their hands during grief and buried their dead, was something else. None of the men spoke of what they'd seen. Not to their wives, not to their neighbors, not even to each other beyond hushed confirmations. They feared not only ridicule, but retribution. Whatever Ali was, whatever he had become, he had power, not just over the boys, but over the minds of the community. The eyes of the congregation were glassy now, their smiles too perfect, their obedience absolute. It was as if the entire town had been placed under a veil. Even Patrick Donnelly, the boy who had whispered warnings to his father in the dead of night, was changing. His voice now echoed oddly in rooms. He spoke of visions he received during Mass, and he no longer looked his father in the eye. Worse still, he stopped sleeping. James would often wake to find Patrick sitting upright in bed, eyes open, lips moving without sound. When asked what he was doing, Patrick would reply calmly, listening. To what? James would demand. To the ones who come from below. James began to wonder if his son's soul had already slipped too far. Meanwhile, Margaret O'Brien continued cleaning the church, but she moved like someone sweeping through a minefield. Her hands shook as she polished chalices. She avoided the basement stairs, and she kept her journal, its pages now filled with entries that could easily be mistaken for the writings of a madwoman. If they weren't all true, she wrote of voices echoing through the church when no one else was there, of candles that relit themselves, of the smell, a sickly blend of lily, wine, and rot that grew stronger each day, and of the feeling that some enormous thing was awake beneath her feet, waiting. On one particularly cold April morning, Margaret found something new cut, neatly etched into the wood of the confessional door. A symbol she had seen before, embroidered on the altar boys' robes. It looked like a cross, but broken, twisted into something unholy. She showed it to no one. That week, another boy vanished. Liam O'Connor, Sean's son, 14, quiet, obedient. He had been attending nightly vigils, which Father Ali claimed were essential for the development of his spiritual receptivity. The morning after his final vigil, Sean found Liam's bed cold, his boots untouched, his prayer book gone. The priest said Liam had been called to Hermitage in the northern mountains, a life of solitude and divine silence, a rare honor, a higher path. Sean knew better. He tried to rally the others, but their courage had evaporated. Michael Walsh was drinking again, often. His son, Timothy, had begun twitching and scratching at his skin, claiming something was underneath. And James ... James could barely look at his own son. Patrick now moved through their home, like a ghost wearing a child's skin. The three men met once more. They devised a desperate plan. They would confront the church hierarchy. Not through letters. Those could be intercepted, but in person. One of them would travel to Philadelphia, to Bishop Kenrick himself, and deliver what they had seen face to face. James volunteered. He packed his rifle, his coat, and the journal. Margaret had reluctantly shared. He left in the night, traveling by horseback, trusting no one, stopping only in towns large enough to offer anonymity. It took 4 days to reach the city. What he found shocked him more than the church basement. Bishop Kenrick had never sent Father Ali. The real Cornelius Ali, the seminary confirmed, had died in a fire in Dublin in 1832. No such reassignment had ever been issued to Sacred Heart. No recommendation letters were in the bishop's archive. The documents Ali had used were forgeries perfect, detailed, and dangerous. James realized with horror that Ali had infiltrated the church, not as a heretic or impostor, but as a predator. He had used the trappings of faith to shield himself, used holy rites to mask something ancient, something far beyond excommunication. Bishop Kenrick listened, grim and quiet. When James finished recounting everything his son's changes, the basement, the rituals, the other boys, the bishop nodded slowly. "You're not the first," he said. Then he opened a cabinet and pulled out a sealed box. Inside were other journals, other testimonies, from Boston, from Baltimore, from small villages in Ohio, stories of visiting priests with glowing credentials, stories of altar boys vanishing, stories of special ceremonies in candlelit basements. A pattern stretching back 2 decades. Church had been watching, silently, carefully, but it was too difficult to act without concrete proof and too dangerous to speak publicly. That's when Kenrick made his decision. He would come to Sacred Heart himself. He would bring investigators, priests trained in more than canon law, men who had studied the old evils, the ones that didn't tremble. At holy water or run from the rosary. James returned home with the bishop's retinue. They arrived 3 days before the next Feast of St. Joseph. It had been exactly 4 years since Michael Flanagan disappeared. Sacred Heart did not welcome them. The villagers stared blankly. Many didn't speak at all. The faithful who once cheered when priests came now watched with narrowed eyes. When Kenrick entered the church, he found it spotless too spotless. Every trace of the old rites scrubbed clean. Every corner sanitized. But something felt wrong. The silence was heavy, unnatural. Mass was underway. Ali stood at the altar, surrounded by his altar boys, 7 in total. They moved with perfect precision, passing items, bowing in unison. Their faces were radiant. Too radiant. Kenrick stepped forward. His voice echoed through the stone nave. "Bring the boys to me." Ali smiled, eyes cold. "They are not yours to summon." The congregation stirred. Ali's tone shifted. His voice deepened physically, impossibly. A second tone beneath it, like a growl beneath a hymn. His body did not change, but his presence seemed to expand, pressing down on the air. "These children are consecrated," he said. "They belong to the true flock now." Kenrick raised his hand and began a prayer. Not a blessing, not a reading, A binding dot, it was older than the church. Itself words passed down in secret among those entrusted to confront things that wore human skin, but not human souls. As he spoke, Ali began to tremble. His mouth stretched open, and from it came a scream like tearing stone. The altar boys collapsed, some convulsed. Others went still. One began to sob. Patrick Donnelly. His eyes, for the first time in months, were his. Kenrick finished the ritual. Ali was gone. What remained was a thing, shriveled and twisted, barely tethered to flesh. The priestly form crumbled like a shell. What was beneath ... no one would ever describe. Not in words that made sense. The church sealed the basement. The story was buried. But some secrets do not stay buried, not when they whisper. What happened at St. Joseph's Church on March 19, 1851, was never meant to be remembered. The church moved swiftly, cloaking its investigation in sacred language and silent rituals. The binding ritual that drove the entity from Father Ali's stolen body had left behind more than screams and scorched air. It had exposed a wound in the soul of the church, one too deep for daylight. By order of the Vatican, all records related to Sacred Heart were sealed. The priests who participated in the confrontation were sent back to their dioceses under strict instruction to speak no more of what they had seen. Bishop Kenrick submitted his official report in coded ecclesiastical language, calling the perpetrator a malevolent intelligence of uncertain origin with demonstrated capacity for deception, control, and spiritual distortion. It was the church's way of saying something not human had worn a priest's face, and it had nearly gotten away with it. The 7 altar boys, found collapsed on the sanctuary floor, were carried away quietly. Of the 7, 5 never woke again. Their bodies remained unresponsive, no heartbeat, no breath, but their eyes stayed open, fixed on nothing. Their skin was cold, but unmarked. Their families were told they had succumbed to a sudden fever and were buried in Sacred Heart Cemetery under marble crosses. No one dared to question the narrative. The other 2 survivors, Patrick Donnelly and Timothy Walsh, awoke screaming. For weeks, their cries shattered the silence of their homes, speaking in languages their parents did not understand. Latin twisted into something older, harsher. At times, their voices echoed unnaturally, as if someone else was speaking through them. The church sent a physician, Dr. Klaus Brennan, a German immigrant trained in both medicine and ancient religious trauma. He examined the boys and found damage not just to their minds, but their nervous systems. Patrick's memory had gaps he couldn't explain. He suffered from seizures, tremors, and hours of catatonic silence. He would wake in the night gasping, convinced something was calling to him from beneath the earth. "They took something from me," he whispered once, eyes wide, "but left something behind too." Timothy fared better, though he developed a stutter and a tremor in his hands that would remain with him for life. He left Sacred Heart and lived in solitude deep in the woods, far from churches, far from bells. Locals whispered he could still speak to ghosts. That sometimes, in the market, he answered voices no one else heard. Back in Sacred Heart, the cleanup had begun. The church was deconsecrated. The basement was sealed in concrete. The chambers below declared structurally unsound and condemned. The building itself was sold to the county, quietly converted into a storage depot for road maintenance. Equipment. The bell tower remained, but its voice was forever silenced. But the silence was deceptive. The trauma seeped into the bones of the town like damp through stone. Families that had stayed now began to scatter. Children who once ran freely now clung to their parents. Those who could not leave found ways to forget drinking, working, praying too hard. Margaret O'Brien stayed, though her eyes were never the same. She burned her journal. Every page. She said writing it had been like feeding the fire with her. own soul. But before she did, she copied one line onto the back wall of her cottage with chalk. He wore faith like a mask, and underneath it was hunger. No one ever erased it. Sacred Heart, once a proud haven for Irish Catholic families, slowly faded. The population dwindled. The parish school shut down, and St. Joseph's Church became a ghost among government paperwork, remembered only in dusty ledgers and whispered memories. But even ghosts leave echoes. In 1867, 16 years after the events at Sacred Heart, a report reached the Diocese of Milwaukee. A small German Catholic farming town in Wisconsin had lost 3 altar boys in less. In a year, the new priest had impeccable credentials, impressive sermons, an otherworldly command of old liturgy. The bishop sent a team to investigate. By the time they arrived, the priest was gone, vanished without a trace. Beneath the church, they found a hidden chamber, symbols carved into the stone, a ritual circle, and blood. No names, no records. Just another scar in a map of unholy patterns. Back in Pennsylvania, Sacred Heart's secrets refused to rest. In 1923, after years of disuse, the old church building was finally demolished to make way for a county courthouse. The workers who cracked the foundation discovered that the basement went far deeper than architectural plans suggested. Carved chambers, geometric stone circles, blackened altars. And bones, 14 sets, arranged in precise formations, each surrounded by relics, wooden crosses, prayer books, fragments of rosaries. The remains of boys who had been missing for nearly a century. The county ordered a hasty reburial. Catholic officials gave the boys a proper ceremony. But none of that changed what was found at the center of the main chamber. A lead-lined box. Inside were photographs, handwritten pages, and sealed correspondence, all ordered. Destroyed in 1854 by the Diocese of Pittsburgh. All preserved. All damning. The documents told the story in terrifying detail. Ali's arrival, the rituals, the disappearances, the confrontation, and then the aftermath. The entity had not died. It had moved on, adapted, shifted form, each time more subtle, each time harder to trace. Bishop Kenrick's original notes were included, scrawled in a trembling hand. It is not one man. It is not one place. It is a force that wears the church like a cloak, and it returns when we stop looking. Despite their significance, the documents were once again sealed, this time in the archives of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Official statements claimed they were inconclusive, that no direct link between the artifacts and demonic influence could be established. Unofficially, the church began monitoring patterns, disappearing altar boys, priests with forged credentials, basements added to churches without permits. Signs were always subtle, always deniable, until it was too late. Even in the decades after Sacred Heart's erasure, strange reports continued. Families who had lived near the church claimed to hear chanting at night, long after the building was demolished. Construction workers at the new courthouse reported tools moving on their own, candles lighting themselves, and whispers during early morning shifts. Some said the air beneath the foundation felt too warm, even in winter, that others quit after dreams, nightmares of children singing in Latin, walking in circles around a black altar that pulsed like a beating heart. Most people dismissed it as superstition, but not all. Dr. Margaret Thornton, a forensic anthropologist who analyzed the bones found in 1923, filed an internal report to both the county and the church. In it, she wrote, "These boys did not die of natural causes. Their bones show no trauma, no disease, but their faces, their teeth. They were screaming when they died." Her report was quietly buried. She left academia the following year. The courthouse still stands today. But beneath it, sealed in stone, lie the remnants of something older than the town, older than the church, older than the faith itself, something that feeds, something that waits. The world forgot about Sacred Heart, but the survivors did not. For those who lived through the nightmare, beneath St. Joseph's Church, time did not heal. It simply changed the shape of the wound. Memories faded at the surface, but deep below, just like the church basement, something continued to stir in the years, following the official sealing of the case. Those touched by the entity found themselves changed forever, even if the world never acknowledged their suffering. Patrick Donnelly, once a bright and curious altar boy with dreams of priesthood, now wandered the back rooms of his family home like a sleepwalker. He could no longer tolerate candlelight. The sound of bells sent him into seizures. His father, James, built blackout shutters for the house and barred the doors at night. Even a distant echo of Latin would reduce Patrick to tears. He rarely spoke. After 1851, and when he did, it was never about the basement. Instead, he spoke in fragments. "Stone eyes watching," he once whispered. "Chambers without air, where breath means nothing." His hands trembled constantly. Once, he tried to draw what he remembered. What emerged on the page wasn't recognizable sprawling lines and symbols that seemed to shift when viewed too long. Patterns that made his father dizzy. James burned the paper that night and locked the pencil drawer. Patrick died at 34. A seizure, they said. But when the undertaker removed his shirt to prepare him for burial, they found something carved into his chest faint, but unmistakable. Same sigil Margaret. O'Brien had once found etched into the confessional door. No one spoke of it at the funeral. Timothy. Walsh lived longer. After fleeing Sacred Heart in his teens, he took refuge in the forests of Somerset County, building a small log cabin miles from the nearest road. He spoke only when necessary. Locals called him the Whisperer, and no one really knew why. Sometimes he'd enter the nearby town to buy salt or candles, staring at the ground, trembling, muttering under his breath. Children were told not to go near him. Some did anyway. They returned shaken. "He talks to people who aren't there," said one boy. Said they live under the trees. Another claimed Timothy had asked him if he'd ever heard a prayer, said backward, and then recited one. The boy developed night terrors afterward and refused to sleep without a cross under his pillow. Timothy died in 1913, his body discovered by a hunter after a late autumn snow. The cabin had collapsed, rotting from beneath, but inside beneath the floorboards was a circle of blackened candles and a single phrase, carved repeatedly into the wood. "He still wears their faces." The church never acknowledged his passing. No. Priest attended the burial. Margaret O'Brien lived the longest. Perhaps it was because she had signs early. Perhaps it was because she chose to watch rather than obey. After Sacred Heart fell silent, she left the village and moved east, to the outskirts of Philadelphia, where she took work as a laundress for the Ursuline sisters. She never married, never joined another parish, but she kept one item from her time in Sacred Heart, a small wooden cross that had once belonged to Tommy Sullivan in 1904. Shortly before her death, she mailed it anonymously to the Archdiocese of Pittsburgh, along with a letter that read, "You sealed the basement, but you didn't clean it. And it doesn't matter what name he wears next. He always finds his way to the altar." The letter was filed away, never answered. But not everyone forgot. The second pattern after Sacred Heart, the church began cataloging unusual cases in secret. Files from parishes across the Midwest and Appalachia began to reveal striking similarities. Disappearances of altar boys. Unusually charismatic priests with untraceable origins. Churches with hidden basements not shown on blueprints. Symbols etched into candle stands, chalices, and confessionals. Masses conducted in strange variations of Latin, where witnesses later complained of headaches, nosebleeds, or memory loss. They began calling these cases obscura sancta, the hidden holy. Some were false alarms, but not all. In 1888, a young seminary student in Cleveland claimed to have uncovered evidence that a visiting priest, one with no known diocese, was conducting secret training sessions with altar boys in the catacombs beneath the city's oldest church. He died 3 weeks later in a fire that was officially ruled an accident. But in the ashes, investigators found 7 scorched surplices, child-sized. The church closed the file. No arrests were made. In 1917, a family in Peoria reported that their son, recently inducted as an altar boy, returned from a private session, speaking in a choral voice, multiple tones layered unnaturally. When asked what had happened, he said, "I learned the words beneath the earth." 2 weeks later, he vanished during an overnight vigil. His priest? Transferred. No forwarding address. The construction unearths a secret in 2003, Sacred Hearts. Courthouse built atop the ruins of the old church was condemned for structural faults. During a renovation project, a maintenance crew drilling near the lowest level found that the sealed concrete slab was cracking, not from pressure above, but from something pushing upward. They halted construction. City officials contacted historical consultants to examine the site. When the slab was finally broken, workers uncovered a hidden cavity beneath the old church foundation. It had not appeared on any blueprints. The air inside was dry, but warm. A stale sweetness clung to the walls, the smell of old wax, rot, and blood. Inside were bones. Small ones, arranged in perfect, spiraling patterns, and something else. A mirror polished slab of black stone, untouched by time, unblemished by dust. When the construction foreman tried to photograph it, the images came out blurred, streaked with static. Digital interference. The lights flickered. One worker claimed he heard children humming, though no one else did. The chamber was resealed the next day. Privately, the lead contractor confided in one of the city supervisors. "It's not just a burial chamber," he said. "It's a throat. Something still breathes down there." Legacy of the masked. Despite all this, no formal statement has ever been made by church leadership. The cases remain disconnected on paper. The archives remain sealed, but some believe the entity never truly left, that it simply moves, adapting with time, shifting its appearance to fit the era. 1 year, it's a priest in a famine-ravaged village. The next, a charismatic youth minister in a modern parish. It doesn't need to possess every soul, only the right ones. The obedient, the lonely, the faithful, those willing to follow the voice from the altar without question. There are modern whispers now. Blogs, message boards, Reddit, threads, accounts that seem too consistent to be coincidence. A church in Missouri where children speak in unison, though no one taught them how. A photo from a retreat in Oregon where a priest's face reflects differently in the mirror. A live-streamed service from Chicago where the organ begins playing before anyone touches the keys. And always, there is a basement. Margaret O'Brien was right. It didn't matter what name it took or how long it slept. Some evils don't die. They wait. It began with a live stream. A quiet Catholic parish in Camden, New Jersey, had begun broadcasting their Sunday masses during the pandemic. Most of their viewership came from elderly shut-ins or parishioners out of town. No one expected more than a dozen eyes on any given week. But on April 3rd, 2020, something changed. A 32-minute clip, uploaded to the church's YouTube channel, gained over 400,000 views in under 3 days. It wasn't because of the homily or the choir. It was because of what happened at the 24:12 mark. The priest, Father Ezra Malloy, is seen performing the Eucharistic rite. Everything is routine. The breaking of the host, the lifting of the chalice. But then, something odd. The camera flickers. The sound becomes distorted. And when the picture returns, Father Malloy is standing completely still, mouth open, eyes locked on the altar dot behind him. A boy in an altar robe is mouthing something, and no sound is heard. His eyes are fixed, wide, and unblinking. Then the boy turns slowly to the camera and smiles, only for a second. But the expression is wrong, too wide, too still. And his teeth are not quite right, too small. Too many. Then the video cuts. The parish took it down within hours. They blamed file corruption. But not before it was downloaded, copied, and circulated. Thousands of people saw it. And among them was Sister Catherine Brill, a retired nun and theology scholar living in Pittsburgh. She had once worked in the Vatican archives, cataloging obscure cases of demonic obsession and anomalous priest behavior. The moment she saw the boy's smile, she froze. She had seen that smile before. In a sketch drawn by a boy named Patrick Donnelly over 150 years ago. A sketch she had found in a sealed folder marked Obscura Sancta Pend. It had been dismissed as hysteria. But Catherine never forgot it. No, it had come back. She reached out to her former contact in Rome, a Jesuit named Father Marius Trevino, who had worked on cases of suspected supernatural infiltration within the church. Within 72 hours, Father Trevino was on a plane to New Jersey. The new priest, Father Ezra Malloy, was 38, Harvard-educated, ordained in 2012, assigned to Our Lady of Perpetual Mercy in Camden in 2018. His rise in the church had been fast. Too fast, according to Trevino. His sermons were magnetic, his Latin flawless, his charisma undeniable. Parishioners described him as a light in the darkness during the pandemic. Young boys adored him. He had re-established the altar training program and began advanced spiritual instruction. Sessions for select boys, always in the evenings, always behind closed doors. Father Trevino arrived unannounced, posing as a visiting scholar from the Archdiocese of Newark. He attended Mass, watched, listened. It was like watching history repeat itself. The way the boys moved in sync. The subtle symbols etched into the altar cloth. The faint smell of incense that wasn't quite right sweet. Yes, but with a hint of iron and rot. After the service, Trevino asked to speak with Malloy privately. The priest smiled politely, but his eyes did not match his face. "Of course, brother," he said. "You've come to witness the new work." Trevino's blood chilled. That phrase, the new work, had been used in one other place, a marginal note in Bishop Kenrick's original Sacred Heart dossier, scribbled beside the entry for Father Ali. A warning. He declined tea, declined small talk. And that night, he returned to the rectory after midnight. The church was locked, but the basement door, once disguised behind an office bookcase, had been left ajar. Trevino descended alone. What he found mirrored the old reports. A stone chamber, lit with electric lanterns, but designed in the shape of a ritual circle, complete with sigils carved into the walls and floor. In the center stood a black altar, slick like oil, and behind it photos of the altar boys, lined up, cataloged, names written in tight, precise script. And next to the photos, a single word carved into the stone, HOST I a sacrifice. Trevino took pictures. Everyone blurred. He heard the whispers too low, murmuring Latin that didn't feel sacred. It felt hungry. When he emerged, the door shut behind him. A familiar pattern back in Rome, Trevino compiled a report. Within it, he connected Sacred Heart to Camden, and further, to 11 other parishes in the last 100 years with similar patterns. Hidden basements, children with sudden personality shifts, priests with unverifiable credentials, secret rituals. disappearances or unexplained deaths near feast days. He called it the pattern of the hollow, flame a name lifted from one of Timothy Walsh's final diary entries before his disappearance in 1913. In every case, the figure at the center presented the same traits: an uncanny charm, an obsession with purity, and the subtle but consistent manipulation of young altar servers. In every case, they called it education. In truth, it was initiation, the hidden doctrine. There were whispers of an ancient splinter sect, not satanic, not pagan, but parasitic. A belief system built around the idea that divinity could be mimicked, not earned. That faith was a doorway, and those who mastered its rituals could wear holiness like skin. They called it Ecclesia Interius, the inner church. It existed beneath real faith, a shadow religion, passed from priest to priest, not in books, but in rituals, symbols, and sacrifice. They believed that by draining the spiritual purity of children, particularly boys sworn to serve the altar, they could feed something older, not a demon, not an angel. Something beyond both, a hunger in the dark. They left no written scripture, only symbols, only silence. But Sister Catherine had found traces: the broken cross sigil, the phrase, "He wears the altar." The term hostia, used not for communion, but for living vessels. The boy who remembered. In June of 2021, one of the Camden altar boys, Noah Riley, was admitted to a psychiatric facility after a violent episode during Mass. He had attacked another altar boy, screaming that he wasn't real, that he had eyes under his skin. During his evaluation, he began drawing page after page of strange symbols: churches with twisted towers, and a face with no eyes. Dr. Lena Markovic, the child psychologist assigned to him, was unnerved. She'd seen similar imagery once before years ago, during a forensic internship involving the Sacred Heart, bones exhumed in 1923. Noah's drawings matched the original basement carvings. No one had ever published them. When asked how he knew, "The shapes," Noah whispered, "Father showed me." But not with his hands, with his voice. With his voice underneath. Dr. Markovic turned his case over to church authorities. They thanked her, then told her to remain silent. The cycle returns today. The pattern continues. The entity has changed forms, changed names. It no longer needs to wait decades. The digital age has accelerated its reach through forums, through live streams, through online communities of vulnerable faith-seekers. It whispers now through Bluetooth speakers, through whispered rituals taught over Zoom, through encrypted chat groups where new priests teach forgotten rites. The brotherhood has gone viral, but it always begins the same: a priest with a smile too perfect, a church with a hidden room, a group of boys eager to please, and a prayer that doesn't feel right. In a secure archive beneath the Vatican, a candle burns beside a wall marked with just 3 words: Sacred Heart survives because evil does not die. It adapts. It was a gray morning in Pittsburgh, the kind where the clouds seem stitched to the rooftops, and every church steeple disappears into fog. Inside a quiet assisted living home on the city's south side, a man in his 80s stared out a rain-drenched window, clutching a weathered rosary. His name was Elias Donnelly, the grandson of Patrick Donnelly, one of the original altar boys from Sacred Heart. Elias had grown up in a house of silence. His father, Daniel, had rarely spoken of his own father, Patrick. What little Elias knew came in fragments: seizures, scribbled drawings, years of staring into nothing. But he remembered the basement. He had been 6 when he followed the sound of muttering one night and found his grandfather crouched in front of the fireplace, carving a symbol into the soot-covered stone. The same one Elias would later see in dreams, on walls, in the grain of wooden pews. A broken cross, a mark that whispered. That image followed Elias into adulthood, He tried to become a priest once, enrolled in seminary, but left after 1 year, shaken by something in the sacristy, the smell of incense, a flickering candle, and a voice that called him by name, though no one else was there. He never returned to theology, but he never stopped searching God in 2022. After the Camden video surfaced and was quietly removed from church platforms, Elias received a package in the mail. It was unsigned. Inside was a burned photo, a charcoal sketch of a stone altar, and a copy of a letter dated 1851 from Bishop Kenrick to the Vatican. The language was coded, but Elias understood. It described a ritual mask, a mimicry of priesthood, an intelligence wearing the skin of faith. The last line read, "We did not drive it away. We only broke its hold. It finds another face, always." Elias, then 81, felt a clarity he hadn't known in decades. This wasn't over. And if the church wouldn't speak, he would. The interview 2 months later. Elias sat down for a recorded interview with investigative journalist Helena Grier, known for her work exposing clergy abuse cover-ups. She expected bitterness, perhaps even confusion. What she got instead was a historian of horror. Elias brought copies of parish records, floor plans of the original St. Joseph's Church, letters retrieved from diocesan libraries, and most hauntingly, transcript of a confession taken in 1862 by a dying priest who had served in Ohio. In the transcript, the priest detailed a secret order within the church, ritual cleansings of boys selected for higher purpose, basements built into churches without permit, language taught that resembled Latin, but distorted, it reversed its power. He ended with this sentence: "The altar is no longer where we meet God, it's where we offer them a way in." Helena, skeptical at first, couldn't deny the documentation, or the conviction in Elias's eyes. He wasn't speculating. He was remembering. The revelation as their interview deepened, Elias revealed something he had never told anyone, not his children, not his priest, not even his confessor. As a child, he had seen the altar room beneath the old Sacred Heart Foundation, not in person. In dreams, night after night, always the same stone chamber, always the same 7 boys standing in a circle, and always the thing in the center shifting, flickering, speaking through their mouths in one chorus. Each time it would look at him, Hostia. It would whisper and every time he'd wake with nosebleeds, fingers clenched in fists so tight his nails left marks in his palms. But what terrified him most wasn't the dream. It was that, as an adult, he found a matching architectural plan, buried in Pittsburgh diocesan files, a blueprint for St. Joseph's Church. It showed a hidden chamber, identical to the one from his dreams, measurements and all. He'd never seen it before, but somehow he had known. Going public with Helena's help, Elias published a report, The Face Beneath the Altar, a collection of timelines, photographs, scans of sealed church memos, and survivor testimony. They included redacted documents from Sacred Heart, Camden, and 6 other parishes linked by pattern, symbol, and silence. They named no names, but they drew a map of connection, impossible to ignore. And then Elias vanished. 2 weeks after the report was published on Helena's independent media site, he was found unconscious in his apartment. No signs of trauma. No signs of stroke or cardiac arrest. He simply collapsed while reading his Bible. He never woke up. Doctors called it an aneurysm. Helena called it something else. Elias had received an email the night before, a message from a private Vatican server. No subject. No body. Just an attachment titled, "We are listening." The response: the church issued no formal comment on the report, but internally, things shifted. Several parishes quietly restructured their altar training programs. In some dioceses, basement access was restricted. A few priests were relocated. under vague circumstances. More telling, however, was the emergence of a small, internal Vatican task force known only as Custodes Tenebrae. The keepers of the dark sources claimed the task force had access to ancient texts locked away since the 17th century, that they operated independently without papal oversight, that they had begun visiting remote churches, inspecting old reliquaries, interrogating priests who could recite prayers backward without instruction. One source claimed they were developing a counter-rite, not an exorcism, but a containment, a ritual designed not to cast out evil, but to trap it. The ripple effect, despite church efforts to contain the panic. Copies of Elias's report continued to spread. Online forums, deep web theological discussions, even underground seminary groups began debating its contents. Was it real? Was the church harboring a secret war? Some dismissed it as conspiracy. Others believed too strongly. One online user, claiming to be a seminarian from Chile, wrote, "I was taught the ancient rite during my novitiate. We were told never to speak it aloud. But it came to me in sleep. And when I said it, the walls bled." Another, from Eastern Europe, posted, "We sealed our church's cellar last winter. When we broke the floor, we found bones. They were buried in a circle." The posts were soon deleted, but not before screenshots spread. The quiet returning, a rural town in Arkansas. A new priest arrived at St. Jude's Church. He was kind, charismatic, a beautiful singer. He immediately began working with the altar boys, introducing chants he claimed were reconstructions of early Gregorian hymns. The boys adored him. The parents felt blessed. The sacristy door was soon locked during certain evening hours. Someone painted over a sigil on the stone behind the altar. No one spoke of it, but those who passed the church at night said they sometimes heard voices. Soft, layered, not quite in harmony. And on March 19th, during a midnight vigil. One boy did not return home. The altar is still open. The circle is still turning, and he still wears their faces. In Vatican City, beneath the cobblestone calm and gilded tradition, a small room hides behind reinforced stone and sealed iron. It's called Archivum Silens, the silent archive. Most priests have never heard of it. Fewer know it actually exists. It's here, in a climate-controlled chamber 4 floors beneath the Apostolic Palace, and a small group of specialists at Custodes Tenebrae have spent the last 2 years attempting to decode what Elias Donnelly unearthed. They are not exorcists. They are not even priests. They are scholars, theologians, linguists, and spiritual engineers. The Church's hidden defense, trained not just to dispel evil, but to map it. And according to their charts, something is about to resurface. The pattern awakens. The Custodes had tracked anomalies across 4 continents, but the signals were no longer subtle. In South Korea, a boy was found reciting Latin prayers in reverse while sleepwalking, despite having no religious background. In Brazil, a cathedral choir collectively forgot their lyrics mid-service and began humming an unrecognized melody in perfect harmony. In Ukraine, the foundation of a newly constructed chapel collapsed into a hollow space that matched the precise geometry of the Sacred Heart Chamber from 1851. Each incident occurred within 3 days of March 19th, the feast of St. Joseph. Just like it always had. And then came the bell, the sound from nowhere at 3:17 a.m. on March 19th, 2023. A bell rang in the old St. Joseph's Courthouse in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. The building had been closed for years. No electrical system remained. No working bell mechanism had existed since 1965. Yet dozens of locals reported hearing it, 3 long chimes, deep and metallic, echoing through the cold night, like thunder wrapped in iron. Sheriff's deputies arrived to find nothing disturbed. No doors open. No footprints in the dust. only the faint scent of melted wax. Local authorities dismissed it as a hoax, but someone was listening. Helena Grier returns. When? Investigative journalist Helena Grier heard about the courthouse bell. She didn't hesitate. She drove 6 hours from her Baltimore apartment to Westmoreland with a camera, a satchel of Elias Donnelly's documents, and a rosary given to her by Sister Catherine Brill before she passed. She was not Catholic, but she believed. She had seen too much not to. The town was smaller than she expected. Weary. The kind of place where every house seems to lean a little, like it knows something it won't say out loud. Helena arrived at the courthouse just before dusk. No police tape, no cameras, just stone and silence. But when she stepped inside, the silence broke. A hum, barely audible, like a chant heard underwater. And then a voice. He's almost here. Helena turned, but the hallway was empty. She pressed forward, guided by old floor plans and Elias's maps. She knew what she was looking for. The sealed chamber, the one beneath the basement. Slabbed out the breach, Helena found the service tunnel that once led to the courthouse sub-basement. A door, bolted with rusted steel, scraped paint. Symbols burned into the wood. Someone had tried to lock it in, but now the door was ajar. The air that drifted out was warm, wet, heavy. She descended. Flashlight flickering, eyes scanning for movement. At the bottom, she found it. The circle, still intact, still black stone polished. But now, the altar at its center bore fresh marks, finger-length streaks, as if something had crawled across its surface from the inside out. She lifted her camera, and then the flashlight died. In the dark. A breath behind her. Not wind. Not mechanical. Breath. Human or close to it. She ran. The Vatican reacts by dawn. Helena's footage was on encrypted channels, shared with her trusted network of contacts. Within 24 hours, the Custodes Tenebrae received a copy. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. The altar was reawakened, and not only that, it had begun calling again. The footage showed faint outlines of new markings carved into the stone symbols, unseen since the Camden incident, but clearly linked by geometry and syntax. One word appeared repeatedly. Porta. Gate. The return of the host. That same day, reports poured in from 3 other countries. In France, a confessional door melted like wax while a priest was inside, chanting an unknown song. In Mexico, 3 altar boys were found in a church basement with identical spiral carvings burned into their palms. They claimed they had been chosen to lead the hymn. In Australia, an underground crypt, sealed since 1902, was found open and empty, though no entrance had ever been recorded. Custodes cross-referenced all events. One phrase appeared in each report, spoken by children. Written on walls. Whispers caught in audio distortion. He wears the altar again. The counter-right back in Rome, the Custodes met in secret. They had long been working on a counter-ritual, compiled from the fragments left by survivors, old Vatican codices, and the broken mutterings of former victims like Patrick Donnelly. They called it Ordo Interitus, the order of UNMAKING. It was not a prayer, it was a weapon, but it could only be used once, and only at the altar where the first possession took place. Sacred Heart, or what remained of it. But there was a problem. The altar had been removed, the church demolished, the foundation buried. And now it had moved, rebuilt, hidden. The final version of the black altar had been installed somewhere new, and only one person knew where. The boy in the bell-towering a rural church in Iowa. A young boy named Gabriel Wynne had begun speaking in his sleep. Latin, mostly, sometimes phrases in no known language. His mother was alarmed, not because he was whispering, but because he was answering something no one else could hear. When asked what he was dreaming, Gabriel replied, "The man in the vestments." with no eyes. He asked me to help build a room with blood and stone and hymns that burn. When she pressed further, he cried, "It's for the altar, but not in the church. In the place beneath the bell." When investigators arrived, they found a hidden shaft beneath the bell tower foundation. Inside, a newly carved circle. In the center, a stone slab identical to the Sacred Heart altar dot, pristine dot, waiting dot, and above it, written on the ceiling in ash, "He is almost born again." As summoning nears, the custodes now had a single chance: return to the origin, seal the gate, or lose the altar forever. A team was assembled: priests, linguists, survivors, those who had seen the face and lived. They would travel to Iowa, to the new chamber beneath the bell tower, and attempt Ordo Interitus, the one rite designed not to purge the evil, but to trap it between worlds. If it failed, there would be no altar left to protect, only doorways, and no one left to close them. The altar calls, the echo returns, and the church must decide to fight for the light, or be swallowed by its own reflection. The night was Windless. The cornfields outside St. Jude's Church in rural Iowa stood silent under a pale moon, their dry stalks barely rustling. Inside the sealed bell tower, 6 figures in black moved in solemn formation, their faces obscured by hoods, each bearing a single object or relic, drawn from centuries of horror and faith. They were the custodes. Tenebre. At the head of their circle stood Father Marius Trevino, his breath calm, though sweat streaked beneath his collar. He had waited his whole life for this moment. This was no longer about research. This was a war for the altar, and it had already begun. The gate below, beneath the bell tower, behind a wall once hidden by stacked hymnals, the chamber awaited. The altar rebuilt. In secret, piece by piece, was now fully active. It pulsed faintly, as if it had a heartbeat. Across its surface were flesh-colored lines, etched in spirals too perfect to be man-made. The sigil at its center, the broken cross, seemed deeper than carved, as though it was growing into the stone dot at precisely 3:17 a.m. The air thickened, the same hour the bell had tolled in Pennsylvania, the same hour the veil thinned. Father Trevino began the rite. Ordo Interitus words had never been spoken aloud, not fully. They were an amalgam of Latin, Sumerian, and syllables that predated Scripture, sourced from the scrawls of a possessed seminarian in 1793. Each phrase was designed not to cast out a demon, but to strip away the mask. To force the thing inside, to reveal its true face. Trevino recited the first line. The candles flickered. Blew. The second. The altar groaned. The third. And the air itself bent, like glass warping in fire. The chamber shook. A wind spiraled upward from the black stone, and with it came a voice layered, distorted, shifting between childlike whispers and guttural howls. You are not worthy of the flame. Father Trevino did not stop. The fourth line. The altar cracked. Something wet trickled from its seams. Blood. Or something worse. The fifth. And the screams began. The waking above ground. In the church nave, Abriel Wynne sat upright in his pew. His eyes turned black, then white, then both. He opened his mouth and began to sing. Not in Latin, not in English, but in the language of the old choir. The sound poured from him like a current, rattling windows, causing light bulbs to burst. The crucifix behind the altar trembled. The tabernacle door swung open, and down below, the chamber cracked open like a shell. From the fissure beneath the altar rose a shape, not a man, not a shadow, but an absence of form, an outline of something. Wrong. It stood within the circle, but its voice was everywhere. You wore faith like armor. I wore it like skin, and they came willingly. The confrontation the custodes surrounded the thing, continuing the rite. Father Trevino stepped forward, holding a relic from Sacred Heart, the scorched rosary once worn by Michael Flanagan. The first boy taken, he pressed it to the altar. "You do not belong." The entity laughed. Neither did they. Then the altar buckled. The chamber walls began to bleed, not red but white, like melted wax. The sigils glowed. The relic cracked, and the boy's voice above turned into a wail of all the stolen voices at once. The choir of the lost, the binding only. One step remained. The final line of the Ordo, Inter adus dot, could not be spoken by Trevino. It had to be given by one of the marked one, who had been touched by the altar, but had broken free. From the far side of the circle stepped Sister Catherine, Brill's niece, Clara, a former postulant who had once survived a near initiation in Camden. She bore the scar on her palm. The spiral brand dot, she spoke the line, and the altar screamed, not the thing. Within it, the shelter itself had split open. The stone dissolved. The symbols burned away from existence, as if peeled from time itself. The shape inside convulsed, then collapsed, dragged inward like smoke into a vacuum. Its last words hissed, "I will return, as long as you have churches." The silence after then, all went quiet. No lights. No voices. Just the breath of 6 weary figures in a ruined circle of broken stone. The black altar was gone. In its place, scorched circle of ash. Gabriel Wynne awoke in the nave above, confused, weeping. The sky began to lighten. And for the first time in 172 years. The altar was truly empty. Aftermath in the weeks that followed. News stories trickled out, never linked. A church fire in Iowa ruled electrical. A brief Vatican bulletin about a relic's reinterment. The quiet burial of a boy in a field, attended by only 2 priests, but the custodes knew, and so did a few others. Helena Grier published her final article. He wore the altar, a century of possession and the church that fought back. It was read by millions. And vanished 2 weeks later. Her site went offline, permanently. The real silence. The Vatican said nothing. The church issued no statement. But inside archivum silence, the black candle that had burned for 2 centuries. Finally went out. The file for Obscura Sancta was moved to a sealed drawer marked in actus. And yet. Epilogue. The whisper 6 months later. A chapel in Lisbon. A new priest arrives. His documents are perfect. His eyes kind. His voice warm. He greets the altar boys by name. Though they have never met. He requests private instruction. In the lower vestry, he introduces a new chant, and when asked where he came from, he only smiles and says, "I've always been part of the church." That night, a boy dreams of a circle of stone, and a whisper beneath his pillow says, "One altar dies, another wakes."